Now, let's talk about some additional symptoms of choline deficiency. These are quite common in my experience. Number one is fatigue. And this has to do, the fatigue piece has to do largely with the neurotransmitter. I said this one earlier, acetylcholine is a primary chemical. So acetylcholine, again, produced as a result of choline, aids in energy, neurological energy. It also aids neurologically in thought. So we get fatigue, we get brain fog, and then subsequently we can get mood changes as well. And then we can also get memory concerns, so dementia, right? Cognitive decline. These are all part of this acetylcholine component of choline. Now, mood changes are also as a result of hormone messaging. I think it's important to understand. Let's minimize this for just a minute, because one of the things that choline helps to do, if we look at a cell, the cell membrane, if we blow it up and we look at the membrane lining, it's what's referred to as a phospholipid bilayer. And a lot of the choline is in this bilayer. It's in this lipid membrane. And so a lot of your choline is in this membrane in the form of what's called phosphatidylcholine. And you've probably seen this before. Phosphatidylcholine is a supplement, right? And it's commonly what they sell it as is lecithin. So if you've ever seen, sunflower lecithin or soy lecithin, it's a common ingredient in supplements that are a source of phosphatidylcholine. And this, again, most of the choline, more than 90% of choline in the body is inside this membrane. And one of its jobs is it helps the receptors that are embedded in this membrane. So let's call this an estrogen receptor. It helps that membrane, when estrogen binds to it, it helps that membrane send the message through the cell wall, so so that the message can get to the DNA and impact the behavior or the change in the DNA that needs to happen as a result of that hormone connecting to that receptor. And so one of the functions of choline, again, is to allow for that communication. The name of this communication, generally it's called a second messenger system. We won't get into the biochemistry of it, but it's a second messenger system. And so when that hormone attaches to a cell, that hormone can send a message and do its job. But if you don't have adequate choline, then that hormone won't work as efficiently. We can get things like mood changes. So very important to understand that it's not just this acetylcholine piece, it's also how choline plays a role in allowing hormones to communicate to your cells and allow your cells to function subsequently. Muscle aches we mentioned a minute ago, and this has to do with acetylcholine as well. And we'll talk about why in just a minute. And then non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which we discussed. Insulin resistance is research showing that choline deficiency leads to the insulin, your body having to produce more insulin in order. This has to do with that secondary messenger system. Insulin docks to an insulin receptor on your cell, and then it upregulates or changes the cell membrane and allows glucose to leave the blood to come into the cell. And so choline can help with that messaging system to open up that door. And if you don't have enough choline, again, you can start to develop an insulin resistance issue. And then nerve pain or nerve tingling. And this also has to do with the acetylcholine, okay, because acetylcholine deficiency can cause neuropathy. So again, a lot of your symptoms are associated with that neurological piece, right? That neurotransmitter that choline is responsible for making. If we look at choline as a whole, okay, so choline we get, again, it's essential. It's important to remember that. You're not gonna have enough by just allowing your body to try to produce what it can. You're gonna need to eat it through your diet. So it's an essential via diet. And this is where a lot of our choline comes from, right, is through the diet. Now, depending on the type of choline, will depend also on how well it's absorbed and the byproducts that it makes and how the bacteria act on it. And we'll talk about that in just a minute too. But your choline, again, has multiple fates. One of the fates of choline is it helps the liver. It's what's called a lipotropic agent, and lipotrophic agent. And what does that mean? It helps the liver properly metabolize and deal with fat. So this is why choline deficiency leads to fatty liver, right? It's because the liver requires choline in essence to package fat properly and ship it out. And if it doesn't have enough choline, it can't do that. So that leads to fatty infiltration and storage in the liver, which leads to fibrosis and then subsequently cirrhosis, right? Which is more later stage of liver damage. We know that choline plays a major role in cardiovascular health, and this has to do with what we referred to or talked about earlier, which is that methylation. One of the byproducts of choline is something called betaine, and betaine is used as a methyl donor, and it helps to convert or change. You've heard me probably before talk about this chemical homocysteine. Now, homocysteine is an independent, you can have your doctor measure this. This is a simple blood test, by the way, and anything less than 9 is ideal. Between about 5 and 9 is ideal for homocysteine. But if your homocysteine levels are elevated, it becomes an independent risk for the development of stroke, of a heart attack, of a vascular event, meaning a cardiovascular thrombotic event where you form plaques. It can also be a risk factor for diabetes. It's a risk factor for certain types of cancer, and it's a risk factor for osteoporosis. So we don't want this chemical hanging around in super high quantities. And so choline, through the production of betaine, helps to metabolize homocysteine into a very important amino acid called methionine. Now, methionine why is it so important? Because methionine is the precursor to making new DNA and RNA. And also helps your body synthesize new protein. And so this is why. Why is this important? This is how you heal and repair. This is one of the very critical parts of why we focus a lot on this word methylation, right? Is because this is part of that process. And so without choline, methylation can be disturbed. There are 4 different ways your body can get rid of homocysteine. Okay, you can get rid of it through the action of folate and B12, which are very important, which I talked about earlier, those B vitamins. You can get rid of it through the action of betaine. You can get rid of it through the action as well of vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 can convert homocysteine long-term into the substance that your liver uses to detoxify, something called glutathione, and that's vitamin B6 dependent. So very, very important process, methylation, and getting rid of homocysteine is obviously important, and the body needs to have multiple ways to do it because it is a risk factor. So that your body has built-in intelligence, and choline is one of those mechanisms. Now, choline also goes on to produce acetylcholine, which we spent a lot of time talking about acetylcholine, and it's important to understand that acetylcholine is the primary nerve or neurotransmitter that your brain uses for cells to communicate. So it's one of the primary nerve chemicals that cells in your brain and nerves in your brain need to communicate to each other. So it's very important. Acetylcholine is also the primary neurotransmitter for muscles to contract, right? So when your nervous system, when your brain tells your arm to move, right? Let's say you're exercising and you're going to do an arm curl, right? Your brain sends that message to your muscle. It relays that message to the muscle through acetylcholine, meaning acetylcholine is responsible for that message and that movement. And if you didn't make enough acetylcholine, your muscles would start to break down. They would start to atrophy, because if your nerve can't communicate to your muscle and the muscle can't be used, it can't be contracted appropriately, then over time it will start to degrade and break down, leading to muscle damage. That's why it causes that potential problem. But then the other big part we haven't really talked about acetylcholine yet is something called parasympathetic tone. Now, most of you have probably heard of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, right? So if we kind of simply summarize sympathetic and parasympathetic, the sympathetic nervous system is what we call fight or flight. Right? This is the nervous system that's on when you're stressed. It's, when you're stressed out to the max, whether that stress is being caused by food sensitivity or chemical exposure or toxins, or whether, somebody jumped out and scared you, or whether you had a terrible relationship that you were going through, right? Your body will go into a sympathetic state, neurologically speaking, which again prepares you to either fight back or run away, right? Because generally, what is this? This is in reference to stress, right? And stress is supposed to be acute, meaning short-lived, where you have a high intense stress for a very short period of time, and then you have this opportunity to recover and relax. Okay? Sympathetic is supposed to be acute, short term. Okay? Most of the time we're supposed to be here, parasympathetic. What does this nervous system do? It helps us rest, heal, digest, make babies, all the things that we spend the bulk of our lives doing, which is, we don't spend the bulk of our life exercising aggressively. We spend large quantities of our time at night, especially healing and repairing, right? And so relaxing, resting, healing, digesting, calmness is what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be here more than we're supposed to be here. The problem in today's world, and one of the reasons why choline deficiency is such a major issue, is that most people live here. And the way I see it, the reason why most people live here is they've broken cardinal rules. What is the biggest cardinal rule is they've traded convenience for health. So what do I mean by that? Look at all the things that we have that are convenient. The number one thing that's convenient for most people is food. But it's really not food. Let me reframe that. It's food. It's frankenfood, because it's not really food, right? Most of what people eat, all those chemicals and toxins in the food, all the preservatives, the additives, the dyes, the thickening agents, all that stuff's genetically modified, full of poisons. It's not really food, but it is very convenient, right? So we traded the convenience of not having to cook, not having to source fresh, whole ingredients for health. And what does that fruit do? That fruit activates the sympathetic nervous system, right? So eating poorly, okay? A lot of people, they also have traded convenience for health in terms of technology, right? So we look at tech. A lot of people surround themselves by EMF through Wi-Fi. And this is one of those things. It's not that, using an internet connection wirelessly is going to kill you tomorrow. It's just like eating fruit today is not going to kill you tomorrow. It's the consistent use over time. Wi-Fi is a slow killer. It's a slow radiation, right? But there's a lot of convenience to using it, right? You can get access to information, you can shop, you can do so many different things that are very convenient. But you got to remember that when you use that, right, without protecting yourself, there's a health detriment that comes with that. So it's this radiation, again, it sends a message and it puts your nervous system in a state of hypersympathetic tone. And there are lots of examples here. We're exposed to heavy metals through our drinking water. We're exposed to pesticides. We're exposed to all types of chemical toxicants in the air, right? And those are all, like when we drive a car, that's a convenience, right? The way we live our modern lives with electricity and everything else, those are conveniences that there's this trade-off. And I'm not saying that sometimes that the trade-off isn't worth it. Sometimes it can be worth it. This isn't me judging you as to whether or not you use technology or modern life elements to make life easier, because there's the opposite to this too, which is if you were out in the woods without protection, without shelter, without modern technology, it's very strong likelihood that you would die earlier from starvation, or that you would die sooner from something tragic happening, like God forbid, a snake bite or an animal attack, or various other types of problems. You might find yourself getting a cut, and that cut getting infected, right? And so there's a trade-off, and there's always this balance that we want to consider. And that's why I'm not telling you all to go try to go live in a cabin in the woods and build it with your bare hands. But you have to keep in mind that you have choices that you can make. And around food, this is the one we can control 100%, and you should not. This is a bad choice. It's just a bad choice. This right here is a bad choice, but sometimes you're not going to have an option. And that, if you travel, for example, you're going to get Wi-Fi exposure when you walk into a building. Like, you're not going to have 100% control over this, so you should protect yourself at home. Your internet should be hardwired. You shouldn't be running signals through the air everywhere and just blasting yourself constantly with this slow level of radiation. You should be protecting yourself as much as you can in that regard. And much like anything else, you should seek to balance the conveniences of life with common sense and the cardinal laws of good health. And there are 7 cardinal laws of good health. Your diet needs to be solid. You need to get good sleep. You need exercise. You need sunshine. You need clean air. You need clean water. And you need to be spiritually sound. Those are the 7 fundamentals, and those are really non-negotiable. You can try to negotiate with them all you want, but you'll lose that battle philosophically. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.